VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us on Crosstalk today here on VCY America. Well, 2026 marks our nation's 250th birthday. And with our Constitution, our freedoms, our liberties, our system of government, it's a nation like no other. But this nation did not just happen. It took people of courage, people of great determination and fortitude, people of valor. We often take for granted what we have as a nation, but we must never forget those heroes who exhibited their Christian faith and their grit that built this nation. Ladies and gentlemen, it took humility, it took justice, commitment, perseverance, and boldness, and it's important that we remember these individuals and the character qualities they demonstrated through their life and action. We must not forget, and it rests upon us to pass these stories on to the next generation. Well, joining us today, we welcome back to Crosstalk Marilyn Boyer. She is a descendant of a Revolutionary War soldier and a daughter of a World War II veteran, deeply patriotic and passionate about our Christian history. As a wife of an Air Force veteran, a mother and home educator of 14 children, and grandmother now to 32, Marilyn's dedication to family and country is unparalleled. She is the author of several books on which we've interviewed her previously, but with us today discussing Profiles of Valor. It's a 4-book set, a compelling set, providing character studies from time period, the War of Independence. And Marilyn, thank you for joining us here today on Crosstalk.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us about your passion for keeping these wonderful stories alive. I mean, these are true accounts that are really the bedrock upon which our nation was founded.
They are. And, you know, our grandparents' generation used to know all these stories. They were household stories. They were told from generation to generation, but we've forgotten them today. So it actually started when I started doing research for my book on the Declaration, the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And then I ran across all these other people that were involved during the founding period that weren't signers of the Declaration. And I thought, I need to record their stories because I don't want people to forget.
We don't want people to forget. And are you concerned that the longer our country exists, the more we take for granted and forget how we've gotten to this point?
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a lot of untruth out there about people trying to make our country seem like it's an evil country, which it was founded on godly principles. And I think we need to realize that nobody's perfect. We're all sinners, but we need to honor the valor that was shown by individuals because it bought the freedom that we enjoy today. You know, without the sacrifice they made, we would not be living in a free country.
Right. And there's a whole lot of schools, really, that have abandoned teaching on these things.
Absolutely. It's a shame.
Well, we've interviewed you before in different book series that you've written, and this one is new to our listeners. But if you would give us an overview of this 4-book set, Profiles of Valor.
Sure. It's 4 books. There's 10 stories in each book, and each person is based on a different character quality. It shows a character quality that they demonstrated. And we've found, you know, when you're teaching your kids about humility or faithfulness or initiative, if you just say use initiative, they don't know what you're talking about. So you need to put shoe leather on it by giving them a real example from history that demonstrated that character quality. And that helps your kids to better be able to use that character quality in their own life. You know, they see how it benefited others.
Well, volume is, as you mentioned, a 4-volume set, and volume 1 covers a time period of July 9th, 1755 to July 17th of 1776, and it is a fascinating book series that you have here, and we're going to look first of all at volume number 1, just to talk about a couple of stories here. But each book, as we mentioned, 10 different characters, some names we recognize, others perhaps it's going to be the first time you hear them. And each one of these really has really a remarkable story, character qualities that stand out. Many will recognize the name of George Washington, Marilyn, and the first president, often referred to as the father of our nation. But you introduced us to him at the time in his life when he was Colonel George Washington, and your opening chapter is titled Bulletproof Coat. Tell us about it.
Okay, he illustrates for us the character quality of humility. Humility is acknowledging that any good I have achieved is a gift from God, and my life is to be used as an instrument in His hands. And this story that I'm going to tell just shows how he believed he was an instrument in God's hands, and he demonstrated great humility. So it takes place in the Battle of Monongahela in Pennsylvania in the French and Indian War in 1755. And at the time, the French Canadians were wanting to seize rich lands in the Ohio River Valley region. So they engaged the Algonquin and the Iroquois Indians to attack and burn settlements. They were scalping people, they were taking prisoners, and then they'd escape over the mountains to the safety of Fort Duquesne. So the French and the British were trading with the colonies, but who would control the Ohio Valley depended on who arrived first and established forts. So Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia, he was instructed by the British government to prevent the French from establishing forts before we could. So he quickly organized two expeditions. One was led by British General Edward Braddock and one by 22-year-old George Washington. The French were dug in at Fort Duquesne, and Braddock marched against them with 1,300 troops. George Washington tried to warn Braddock. He had been a surveyor, so he was familiar with Indians. And he tried to warn Braddock from marching into the forest that was full of Native Americans, so visible with the British red coats. But Braddock arrogantly replied, "They may frighten Continental troops, but they can make no impression on the King's regulars." The British at this time kind of looked down on the colonists as country bumpkins. They were dressed in homespun. They had no military training. So he insisted on the British way of fighting by lining up in neat rows and facing the enemies with those very visible red coats. But Washington knew how the Native Americans fought, by darting to hide behind trees. And that was really the only way to survive in the wilderness. But Braddock dismissed his suggestion with scorn. So they were 7 miles away from the fort when they were ambushed by the enemy, firing from behind rocks, trees, and thickets. And the British in their nice, neat columns were shot down like ninepins. Braddock was shot in the chest, and within minutes, 85 officers were dead or wounded.
Wow.
714 soldiers lay dead or were crawling away wounded. And the Algonquin chief caught sight of Washington. He was the last officer. The officers were on horseback, so they were pretty noticeable. And he instructed his braves, "Mark, tall and daring warrior, he is not of the redcoat tribe. He hath wisdom, and his warriors fight as we do. See him alone, exposed. Quick, let your aim be certain so he dies." So the bullets were flying instantly through the air, and they were all pointed at Washington. One bullet sliced through his coat, and he rode on. A second and third bullet pierced his uniform. His horse was shot out from under him. He seized a riderless horse, while a fourth bullet ripped his coat. Another horse was shot out from under him. He later told his family that the all-powerful dispensation of Providence was protecting him. He just felt it at that time. Suddenly, the Algonquin chief ordered his braves to stop firing, telling them that this man was not meant to die by bullets. He was the only officer left alive. He led the remaining troops across back the river to safety. And 15 years later, this is the really cool part, he was near the Ohio River, near the same spot, and the Algonquin chief, a very old man at the time, came up to Washington and asked to speak to him. He said that on that day, 15 years ago, his braves never missed a shot. They had shot at him time and time again. The chief told him that he himself had fired 17 times without success. And back then, he predicted that the Great Spirit had protected Washington, and that he would become the chief of nations, and that a people yet unborn would hail him as the founder of a mighty empire. He predicted that. And then he said, "I am a chief and ruler over all my tribes. I have traveled a long and weary path that I might see the young warrior of the great battle. I called to my men and said, mark yon tall and daring warrior. Quick, let your aim be certain, and he dies. Our rifles were leveled, rifles which but for him knew not how to miss. 'Twas all in vain. A power far mightier than we shielded him from harm.
Well,
And Washington, he humbly gave glory to God for protecting him. He did not take personal credit for his survival. And then really cool, at the end of the Revolutionary War, and the end of the end of the Revolutionary War, he turned in his resignation rather than becoming king or dictator. King George was amazed at his humility. He said, if he does that, he'll prove to be the greatest man in the world. He was just a perfect example of humility.
Yes, yes. You know, it is so amazing. The Algonquin chief, as they point out, our rifles were ready. They knew how to shoot. They knew how to kill, and yet we can see God's hand of providence even upon George Washington, then as colonel, but certainly God had a higher calling for him later in life as well. But what a remarkable statement from King George III about, knowing that Washington could have become a dictator at that point or a king, but he did not want to go that direction.
Yeah. It's just a perfect example of humility.
It really is. It really is. And friends, that is the very first of the stories in the book here, Profiles of Valor, in volume number 1. We'll be sharing with you a little bit later how you can obtain a copy of them. But one of the things I appreciate also is that each one of these characters and each one of these qualities, you also include a scripture with each of the qualities that really gives us a biblical foundation for that quality. And that's an important foundation to have, isn't it?
It really is. You know, the character qualities are just attributes of Jesus Christ. So when we study character, we're studying to be more like Jesus Christ. He's the perfect example of all the character qualities.
Well, friends, this is one story in Volume 1, but you've got 10 stories in each book. We've got just a minute before break, and maybe we'll just get this introduced. Son of Liberty, Samuel Adams, you've got the quality of passion. And if you would, just give us a brief intro. We'll pick up on the other side of the break. But Boston, Massachusetts, March 5, 1776, the man who was called the firebrand of the Revolution, yet he wasn't really fond of violent resistance or going to war. Give us a word about him.
Yeah, he was actually working tirelessly to try to persuade the British government to grant American citizens the full rights of Englishmen. You know, he was working toward that until he realized they were not going to do that. And he was gifted with a fiery rhetoric, and he had the ability to hold his listeners spellbound and move them for action because of his passion.
Wow.
He had a deep passion for justice and freedom, but it was seasoned with a deep reverence for God and a love for his countrymen.
Friends, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll talk more about John Adams, kind of unfair, or Samuel Adams, rather, just barely getting into the story and having to take a break here. But you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Marilyn Boyer is with us today. Marilyn Boyer is the author of Profiles of Valor, and we'll talk more about these right after the break. This is Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how did Darwin come up with the idea of evolution?
Chris Charles Darwin was actually preparing to be a pastor. His real interest, however, was in the study of nature. Sometimes school kids are taught that Darwin was a believer in creation until he went to the Galapagos and saw that the facts of nature pointed otherwise. This is not true. Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was a renowned scientist and poet back in the 1700s. He was also a vicious anti-Christian. In 1770, he began to promote evolutionary ideas. When Charles Darwin wrote his book Origin of Species, he repeated the main examples of evolution used by his grandfather. He rejected Scripture in favor of his grandfather's evolutionary ideas, and thereby affected the whole Western world. How much better if he had gone back to Genesis and seen the truth that's recorded there.
Thanks, Dr. John.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Marilyn Boyer is with us today, who's put together a wonderful 4-pack of books called Profiles of Valor, each volume with 10 separate stories in the book, and really remarkable to help us remember these individuals and really the character qualities that make them up and who define who these people are. We were just talking about Samuel Adams and the quality of passion. So you mentioned that he had such fiery speech that had that passion to bring sides together?
Absolutely. But he had a strong sense of integrity, too, and he believed that God was the author of liberty, and his passion was to be an instrument used by God. So God used him to encourage others during the dark days of the Revolution, and he reminded them of all the wonderful acts of God's providence in their behalf, which we could talk about that another time. There were so many acts of providence during this time. But as you said, he was not in favor of violent resistance as long as there was a chance of peaceful solution. But when war was inevitable, Sam became the spark that fired that explosion. He helped to establish the Committees of Correspondence and the Continental Congress. He helped to settle people and actually provided solutions to prevent bloodshed at the Boston Massacre. He was bribed by the British governor, Thomas Gage, to renounce his objections to English policies and threatened that if he refused, he'd be arrested and sent to England to be tried and hung. He said, "I trust I have long since made my peace with the King of Kings. No personal consideration shall induce me to abandon the righteous cause of my country."
Wow.
And that response so angered the governor that when he issued a proclamation offering a pardon to the, quote, rebels who would return to what he claimed to be their duty, he made exceptions. In the case of Sam Adams and John Hancock, there would be no pardon for them. So when the Battle of Lexington was begun, they sent soldiers to confiscate arms and ammo and Sam and John. They wanted to capture them and send them to England to be hung. The next morning after the Battle of Lexington, Sam was heard to say, "This is a glorious day for America." He was thinking of us, of future generations who would be born into freedom. And he used every persuasive power he possessed to rouse people to action. It became his mission. His fame, his passion, his boldness fueled the flame. And he was among the first to advocate for the Declaration of Independence, too. But one thing I need to mention about him, in his last will and testament, he wanted to make sure his posterity would know what he believed. And his own words are, "I rely on the merits of Jesus Christ as a pardon for all my sins."
We don't hear about that much in our schools, do we?
No, we sure don't. And, of all those 56 signers, a lot of them did that in their last will and testament. They wrote what they personally believed, so posterity would never have to doubt.
Yeah. We could here an advocate for the Declaration of Independence offered a bribe, refusing it. It was more important for him in his relationship with the King of Kings than it was for the King of England. And that also speaks to his integrity.
Absolutely. It sure does. And also in this book, we don't have time in book one to talk about Reverend Jacob Duché or Wentworth Cheswell, but there's so many cool stories. Wentworth Cheswell rode like Paul Revere, but he was on another area where the British weren't going. But he rode just as hard, and he delivered messages all over Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So there's just so many people, that you have to hear about.
Yes, and we could spend a whole program just on Volume 1 alone, but we're going to move on to book number 2, and friends will tell you in a bit how you can get this 4-book series. It's really fascinating, but we're going to introduce you to yet another 10 character qualities exhibited by individuals from December of 1775 to December of 1777, and we're going to go back to George Washington for a bit, now no longer a colonel, but a general. And you've got an interesting chapter called Night of Fog. So tell us about that account, March 1776. That's 250 years ago this very month.
It actually is. And I will tell you something about this interesting about this very day in just a minute. But the story actually starts with the story before that, the Noble Train. And Washington, he desperately wanted to end the siege of Boston. There were 10,000 British troops occupying the city. But he thought, how can I do that? Well, Henry Knox suggested bringing the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga. It was a long shot, but they would try it. And in the book, there's a whole story about him, but he was a 25-year-old bookseller, and he pulled off what historians call one of the greatest logistical feats of the American Revolution. His mission was known as the Noble Train of Artillery, and he transported 43 cannons, 120,000 pounds in artillery. He moved it through 300 miles of winter wilderness. It took him from November to January, 56 days. He used sleds, he used 80 of oxen, and it's just an amazing story. I mean, he was over mountains and stuff, and he used ropes and pulleys to keep him from sliding back down. But what they used it for was what you were talking about. The night of March 4th, 1776, Washington used Knox cannons to fortify Dorchester Heights, which was a hill that overlooked Boston Harbor. And I actually was born in Dorchester, so I've been up there. I know what this looks like.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, it really is. There were 2,000 American troops under the cover of darkness. They climbed silently to the top of Dorchester Heights. And this is one of those acts of providence. It was extremely foggy at the foot of the hill. But once they got to the top, the fog cleared, and it was bright silver moonlight, which aided their work. So they worked feverishly, dragging that cannon up the hill. They chopped down trees to form an abatis of sharpened tree trunks that jutted out to slow down the British. They filled barrels with rocks to roll down on the advancing redcoats. And on the morning of March 4th, this was exactly 6 years after the Boston Massacre, General Howe awoke to find Continental cannons directed down at his troops from Dorchester Heights.
Wow.
He was astonished, and he said, "The rebels have done more in one night than my whole army could do in months." But he planned to have his men storm the hill the following day. This is another act of providence that is so cool. That night, there was a violent blizzard that occurred, and there was a Reverend Gordon that lived in Boston. He later wrote, "When I heard in the night how amazingly strong the wind blew, I pleased myself with the reflection that the Lord might be working deliverance for us and thus prevent the diffusion of blood. He was right. The wind destroyed the British fleet, and Howe knew that by the time he could repair it, the Americans would have a great advantage over him. So without shedding of one drop of blood, 10,000 British troops withdrew from the city of Boston."
Wow.
Now, this happened on March 17th, today. Others celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but in Boston, they celebrate a double holiday. Today is Evacuation Day, the 250th anniversary of the first evacuation day. And that one event gave the American colonies their first major strategic victory of the war.
Each chapter, you also have photos. You've got illustrations, but at the end, and at the end of each of these chapters, you also have a series of questions that are helpful to making sure you grasp the concepts and the stories.
Absolutely. I mean, people can just read them themselves. Kids can read them themselves, or families can do it together. You could even do it like at family night, and the questions are already there for you to spur discussion about it.
Friends, the Profiles of Valor, I should say, it's a good value here too today because it's a 4-book set with each book containing 10 true stories along with 10 character qualities that have been exhibited. And if you were to purchase the 4 books separately, it would be $43.96. The publisher puts them together, though, at a set for $39.99. However, our VCY bookstore has chosen this as a book of the month and has worked out a special arrangement with the publisher. And so through March 31st, the VCY bookstore is offering this set of 4 books for just $21.99. That's 50% off the individual book price.
Which is amazing. Yeah. I've never heard them that good of an offer anywhere.
I've not found them anywhere cheaper online. You have to add a tax, or if you need it shipped to you, there'll be shipping there. But friends, you can call right now to the bookstore. You can go online at vcy.com, or 1-888-722-4829. 1-888-722-4829. 4829. And Marilyn, really, the plan is to get this in as many hands as possible to help these stories live on.
Absolutely.
Volume 2, you also introduce us to the quality of resourcefulness, in which you introduce us to Oliver Wolcott, and you've got an intriguing chapter called His Melted Majesty. That's pretty intriguing.
It is. I love this story. He happened to be in New York when the Declaration of Independence was first being read. George Washington was reading it to the crowd. And when he finished, cheers rang out as the soldiers and citizens celebrated. So 40 of the soldiers, sailors, and citizens ran toward the 4,000-pound lead statue of King George that was standing in Bowling Green Square. Someone threw a rope over his head, and they pulled the statue till it fell to the ground with this huge crash, breaking off his head. So Oliver Wolcott was on his way back home to Connecticut from Philadelphia, so he quickly loaded the remainder of the statue, and he brought it home with him. There, his wife, children, and neighbor ladies began melting down the statue to make much-needed lead bullets. His daughter, Laura, made 8,378 bullets. His daughter, Marianne, made 10,790. Wow. And his little boy, Frederick, made 936. In all, over 42,000 bullets were made from King George. Wow. And he began distributing it to the militiamen. But what's really cool is at the Battle of Saratoga, where he was commanding, they used those bullets to win a victory. And those melted blasts of His Melted Majesty defeated the British at the Battle of Saratoga. And if that's not resourcefulness, you know.
Yeah. He actually put them back into circulation.
He sure did.
Wow. And it was neat how he involved his children in that project.
Absolutely, the whole family and even the neighbors.
Yeah, and again, friends, you have to read all the details in His Melted Majesty. I really wish we could go through every story in these books. Each book has 10, but while time does not allow that, you can get this book set through the bookstore. In just a minute from the next break, we're going to be looking at volume number 3 next. That contains yet another set of 10 characters and the qualities that come along with them. And it's important that we know these. And that's something more than just knowing the story. It's building in us a biblical quality in our lives too, Marilyn.
It absolutely is. And it's giving kids an example, seeing it in action.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing how important it is to develop these qualities in their life.
Indeed. And every one of these, again, a verse of Scripture, it tells about the story, the character quality, tells about the character, then questions following it at the end of each story. So we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk about more from Volume 3. We'll choose a couple of stories here yet on the program, and Lord willing, have a time for you to call in as well and participate in the broadcast. But you can take advantage of this series at vcy.com, or 1-888-722-4829. And what a wonderful gift to give as well. Think of 8th grade graduations coming up, high school as well. Adults will benefit from the series. We'll be back in just 1 minute. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
Christian film writer, director, and producer Rich Cristiano has released 4 powerful films that motivate, encourage, and challenge believers. These also share an evangelistic message to the lost. VCY is offering the Cristiano 4-pack DVD set. The set includes Unidentified, which follows reporters as they cover the UFO issue only to be confronted by their eternal destiny. The Secrets of Jonathan Sperry, demonstrating the powerful impact a senior citizen has on young boys to reach others with the gospel. Play the Flute, which follows a youth leader who is put in charge of a teen group that is filled with spiritual apathy and finds himself in an uphill battle. And then A Matter of Faith, showing a Christian girl whose faith is challenged as she leaves for college. This 4-pack Cristiano set is available for $35 when you call 1-800-729-9829.
Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. We're talking with Marilyn Boyer today, author of Profiles of Valor. It's a 4-book set, and I really wish we could go through every story because everyone is so fascinating, and the character quality that comes with the individual story. These are stories that need to be maintained, though, and need to continue to be told because we're raising a generation that has forgotten this, forgot the history, forgot those who have sacrificed much for what we hold dear as a nation, and certainly what makes us unique. And Marilyn, we know that these are not being taught in most schools here today. It's important, in my opinion, that these stories live on. But it says for grade 7 on up, but I'm going to emphasis on up. I mean, I'm in my 60s, and there's much I learned from these stories. They're very, very intriguing.
They are, and I think even younger kids would like parents to read them to them, or their older brothers and sisters. I would say they're kind of ageless because we all need to know these profiles of valor.
Indeed. Friends, elementary age children, a parent, a grandparent reading these stories. What a wonderful thing to have at Grandma and Grandpa's house when the grandkids come over. Hey, let's sit down and read one of these and learn from it as well. You use the quality of discretion in book number 3, volume number 3, as you write about Nancy Strong, who is referred to as the petticoat spy. Who knew that doing laundry could make such an impact? So tell us about her.
So true. She was a part of the Culper spy ring, which actually helped to win the war. She lived in Setauket, New York, and she was 37 years old, and her husband was a prisoner of the British. He was on the British ship Jersey, where we lost more men to the treatment on the British prison ship than we did in the war. But anyway, she and her 7 children moved to a small cottage on their property because their main residence had been taken over by the British. So the Culper spy ring were mostly residents of Long Island who had been schoolmates. They'd grown up together. And the ring stretched from New York City to Washington's headquarters and back. Her part in the spy ring was to use her clothesline to notify other members of the ring of the British presence. So they were on a cove, Conscience Bay, and they numbered each cove in Conscience Bay. So when the British occupied a cove, Nancy hung a red petticoat on her line. And next to it, she would hang as many white handkerchiefs to indicate which bay they were in. If they were in Bay 3, she would hang 3 white handkerchiefs next to the red petticoat. When the British, so then Caleb Brewster, he was another one. He was Agent 725, and he owned a whaleboat, and he delivered messages in his whaleboat. In New York City, there was Robert Townsend. He was a patriot who owned a coffee shop, and he pretended to be a Tory, and he often chatted with the British generals over lunch. So he wrote down information he learned and passed it on down the ring. Austin Rowe was a tavern owner who rode the 55 miles into the city to Townsend's coffee shop to retrieve or bring messages under the cover of buying supplies for his tavern. He did buy supplies for his tavern. Messages were written with invisible ink and in special code. So Rowe would cross the street to enter James Rivington's print shop, and he supplied the paper to use the coded messages. And these guys all knew each other, but nobody really knew who was doing what because they were trying to maintain their integrity, which they did until years later. Even George Washington didn't know who all these people were.
Wow.
So on the way home, Rowe would stop by Thomas Woodhull's farm. Thomas Woodhull was right across the bay from Nancy Strong, so she could easily see his property. And when she saw that information had been delivered to Woodhull's, Rowe would stop and slide the letter into a drop box hidden behind his fence. Nancy would see that it had been delivered, and she would hang a black petticoat on the line when it was safe to carry the message to Brewster and handkerchiefs to show what cove he was hiding in. And she often would send her son out to go fishing or to get clams, and he would spy to see where the British were and where the whaleboat was waiting. And then Brewster wrote Across the Sound, where he delivered the message to Benjamin Tallmadge. He was the head spy master, and he actually took the information to General Washington. But it was not until the 20th century that it was discovered who the members were of that cult or spy ring. But the information they passed effectively helped to win the war. Washington had no monetary, naval, or artillery advantage over the British. The war was won because he had better information as to the enemy's movements and plans.
You know, it's amazing. And again, the character quality there, the scripture there, questions at the end of this, but really to see how God used common, ordinary people in this process, Marilyn.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, these guys went to school together. It was just ordinary people.
People hanging up wash, people going out in their boat and putting down a certain oar or whatever it may be, and how God used this. And friends, we're reaping the benefit from that today. This is difficult, but let's just go into book 4 for a bit here. And that was only one for book 3, but you have on page 109 in your book, Searching Out the Best, dealing with Thomas Jefferson. And he's a man that's come under a lot of scrutiny today.
He has, and that's why I wanted to tell you about him. You know, you hear that he cut the words of Jesus out of his Bible because he believed them to be contrary to reason. And this has been propagated by the revisionists, but it's totally untrue according to Jefferson's own words. It is true that he did cut the red-letter words of Jesus out of his copy of the Bible, but then he carefully pasted them into a blank book. Now get this, this was the title of his book, a very long title. The Philosophy of Jesus Christ, being extracted from the account of his life and doctrines given by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, being an abridgment of the New Testament for the use of the Indians, unembarrassed with matters of fact or faith beyond their level of comprehension. So in other words, he was creating a collection of the teachings of Jesus from Scripture to use to evangelize the Indians.
Wow. He wasn't denying the Scriptures. He was furthering the Scriptures.
He was furthering them, and he had a super great respect for Christ and the Bible. During his life, he studied all the famous moral teachers, and he said he found Jesus to be vastly superior to all others. And his reverence for the Bible is proved in his own record books. He often used his own funds for printing Bibles. He had a deep commitment to missionary efforts among the Indians. He consistently donated his own money to missionaries and societies that distributed Bibles to Indians and Americans in general. And he said he believed the Bible would be of great benefit to anyone who would read it and apply their teachings to his life. He actually had a second copy that he cut the words out, and he kept that by his bed and read it every night before he went to bed. His copy was found by his eldest grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph. And in 1886, Cyrus Adler, who was the librarian of the Smithsonian, located the copy that his grandson had found and arranged for Congress to purchase it. 9,000 copies were printed at government expense, and for the next 50 years, a copy of this, which they titled The Life and Morals of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, was given to every congressman and senator at their swearing in. Now imagine that.
Wow.
You know, we don't have evidence that he found salvation in Christ, but we do know that he had respect for the Bible, and he even made it the primary textbook in Washington, D.C. schools while he was president.
You use a quality of uprightness for him, adhering strictly to moral principles, righteous. And then from Proverbs 14:2, he that walketh in his uprightness feareth the Lord, but he that is perverse in his ways despiseth him. And that's what character quality describes him.
It does. It really does.
And friends, again, that one is in volume 4 of this series of books. I do want to open our phone lines here. If you've got questions you would like to ask of Marilyn Boyer here pertaining to this book series and the profiles of valor, our number to Crosstalk is 1-800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Keep in mind, these books allow you just to step into the very earliest days of our fight for freedom. and see some of these turning points. You're going to see struggles unfold. You're going to see the eventual celebrations of the founding of our nation, the chaos of the battlefields, the secret midnight rides, 40 real heroes, 10 in each one of the books, but every one of them having a powerful virtue, humility, justice, determination, stories that reveal the Christian faith and grit that built this nation. The 4-book series certainly helps you fall in love with American history, reconnect with our godly founding values, and discover a pathway for the future. That's a 4-book set. Again, if you would buy them individually, they're $43.96. The publisher puts them together in a package for $39.99, but through March 31st, our VCY bookstore is featuring this at $21.99. That's like $5.50 per book, and any applicable tax and or shipping. It's available at vcy.com, or by calling 1-888-722-4829. Marilyn, we're just like 2 minutes before the break here, and let's just try and squeeze in a mini version of another story here today. And I see one that you have is called The Fighting Chaplain, Reverend James Caldwell, using the topic of creativity, seeking godly wisdom for a new way to get the job done.
Absolutely. He, his wife was killed by one of the Hessians. She was sitting on her bed with her baby and her 3-year-old, and one of the Hessians came up and shot her dead. And of course, he was heartbroken, but he went back to fight in the war, and they were facing 5,000 Hessians. The Americans were outnumbered 6-1. And the soldiers ran out of wadding for their guns. Guns were useless without wadding to pack their bullets. So he ran into the church. He came out with armloads of Isaac Watts hymnals, and tearing out the pages, he started bunching it up for wadding, and he hollered, "Give 'em Watts, boys!" And the Continental soldiers burst into battle, and they were given a moral boost by his creativity. We use him for creativity. Mm-hmm. There's also, there's like a 16-year-old girl who was available to deliver messages to Washington. I mean, you'll just find all kinds of stories in these books. And
friends, again, available through the bookstore. Let's talk to Faith in Pennsylvania. Hi, Faith, you're on the air.
Hi there. I read in a book by a credible author that at the end of the Civil War, what they called the Coloreds presented a Bible to President Lincoln. Can you substantiate that?
I do not know about that, but when I wrote about Lincoln in my other series, The What a Character, he got saved after the Battle of Gettysburg. So very towards the end of the war, he did become a Christian. So I would not be surprised if that were true.
Great.
There was a devotional, too, that I don't know if he just put his name on it or what, but actually I have it. So. Well, thank you.
Oh, really?
Great. Thank you, Faith.
Lincoln devotional. Yes. Yeah, great.
Thanks for calling.
Appreciate the call. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back to more of your calls. Our number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. We'll be back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. We know that America is involved in a spiritual battle. We also know America is involved in a worldview war. We often hear about how countries like Russia, China, Iran are aligned together in an economic war against America with the BRICS banking system. But there's also a penetration of the media, education, and even religious institutions and denominations. One of the people I want to warn you about is a guy by the name of Alexander Dugin. He's often referred to as Putin's brain. He said, quote, "It is especially important to introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity," end quote. Is that not what's happening in America today? An internal American disorder? He goes on to talk about the need to highlight extremist, racist, and sectarian groups. There's a worldview war, a spiritual battle, and much of it comes from enemies that are foreign and domestic.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Marilyn Boyer, our guest today. The series called Profiles of Valor, and this during our 250th birthday as a nation. What a great time to obtain this. And Marilyn, really using this even as a gift set is a great idea as well.
It really is. Like we said, for all ages, it'd be a great gift. We
have Mike in Springfield, Missouri. Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Hey, Jim and Miss Marilyn. My question is, because of the 250th anniversary of our nation, is any members of Congress or the White House aware of these books? Can they be made available to them? Or
good question. I would definitely be glad to make it available to them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to go about that. My sons are very heavily involved in politics. There may be a way we could get it to them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Good thought.
But I think there's just a lot in Congress that have no idea the history of our nation.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
And these books would really be good for that.
Thank you, Mike. And maybe it's up to constituents to get a set to send to their member of Congress.
Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah.
Let's go to Teresa in Plover, Wisconsin. Hi, Teresa. You're on the air.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I have your set, What a Character, Notable Lives from History.
Mm-hmm.
Is this new set like an extension of that?
No, it's different stories. It's for a little bit older kids, but it's there's other stories that are not in the What a Character.
Okay, so it would be a good, after they learn from the little thing, when they're little with this one, to get that one to reinforce it and reinforce different aspects.
Absolutely. And all of them are good for all ages, even the What a Character. We found younger kids like them and adults like them, but these especially, I think they're just ageless, and I think they'd be good for all ages.
Every grandma and grandpa's going to like these too. I mean, they really are ages.
Yeah, I'm a grandma, and I read them to them, but I enjoy them too. There's stuff in there I didn't know.
Yeah.
So, you're right.
So these are additional stories. Great. Thanks, Teresa.
Yep.
We've got Ralph in South Dakota. Ralph, you're on the air.
I'd like to let Marilyn know. I had read a book, many years ago. I am almost 68 now, and it was probably when I was in my teens. It was called Spies of the Revolution, and when she talked about the Culper spy ring, that sort of rang a bell. I don't know if it mentioned Nancy Strong, but Benjamin Talmadge I know was mentioned, and probably a couple of the other men. It also mentioned
I think I might have actually read that book. That sounds familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it mentioned a Quaker woman that the British were quartered in her house, and she could overhear their plans, and she walked 7 miles, I think, to Washington.
Wow.
Quarters.
Lydia Dara.
Yeah,
she listened, and her son was actually at White Marsh. He was in the Continental Army, and she delivered messages. She would listen to the British who were meeting in her home, and she would deliver the messages. She'd walk all that way herself, usually with a bag of wheat on her back, as a disguise for going to the Continental Army and delivering the messages. Yeah, it's a great story. There's so many good stories.
Yeah. Ralph, thank you for bringing that to our attention today. We're about out of time. Marilyn, we've got 3 minutes, and I'm going to have you have to encapsulate one last story here for our listeners. It's regarding James Armistead, known in your book here as Double Agent. The setting is Yorktown, Virginia, 1781. Tell us about him.
He was 33 years old. He was a slave, and his owner gave him permission to fight if he would come back after the war. So he signed up to be a spy, and he got really close with Lafayette. So he was a double agent. He infiltrated the British camp, acting as an orderly. Black men were not suspected as spies, so he assumed the role of an escaped slave. He observed the number of cannons, the troop positions, the number of men, the mindset of the soldiers. And he had such a sharp mind, he didn't have to write things down. So then at night, he would go and relay the information to the American side, and they would also pass misinformation to him. So in the morning, he'd go back to the British side, and he would give them disinformation. And really, it is because of Armistead, because he passed information so quickly to Washington, that he was able to trap the British and blockade them by sea with the help of the French at the Battle of Yorktown. If he had not been so cautious in his service, we may not have won that last major battle of the Revolutionary War. And then just a really cool thing, after the war, Lafayette helped him to obtain his freedom.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And friends, so many amazing stories that are in these books. What are you hoping that these books will accomplish, Marilyn?
I am hoping that they revive these stories of valor that we need to know. It needs to be a part of our library in our head that we can share with others. But it's also just an inspiration to kids. Like I said, they're all character-based. So if kids get examples of how people put these character qualities into action, it's inspiring for us to do that today, to be useful. You know, these were just regular people, like you said, and we're regular people, and God can use us today if we will aspire to be useful and to apply the characteristics of Jesus to our lives.
Each one of these volumes, it's a 4-volume set. Each volume is about 145 to 170 pages. And one nice feature, these are short stories. So you can pick it up for 10 minutes, read just one story, put a bookmark in, come back at a later time, or switch between volumes. It all works really well, Marilyn.
Absolutely. A lot of homeschoolers use them in their morning baskets, too. It's a great read just to read at the beginning of the day.
Well, Marilyn, thank you so much for taking the time, the effort to do the research and putting these stories together.
Oh, you are so welcome. It was like uncovering treasure to do this research.
Friends, again, if you'd like to obtain this set, Marilyn Boyer, the author, she is a descendant of a Revolutionary War soldier, a daughter of a World War II vet, and cares about our country. She's passionate about our Christian history and wants this to pass on to the next generation. And that's up to us to pass this on as well. A 4-volume set, and the VCY Bookstore is part of our non-profit ministry of VCY America. They put the money right back in the ministry. And this set, normally as a 4-book set, $39.99. They're featuring it $21.99. And you can reach out to our bookstore, vcy.com, or call 1-888-722-4829. And friends, they have just a single line going in there. We don't have any big call centers, just people there to serve you. 1-888-722-4829. Open till 6 p.m. Central Time tonight and tomorrow, and Saturday from 10 to 4. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.